Hello folks, it's Jeremy Whaley here, and I am so excited to bring this video to you. One could say this video has been in the make for at least 4 years, but I think you can make the argument it's really going all the way back to 2011 when I first discovered some of these things that I'm going to talk to you about, and here we are. Here we are. The time has come. I've waited for this day, and I am so excited to bring it to you. So much so that I have given this a new name because we're getting into a new era. We're getting into a new era of society, a new era of economics, which means we're getting into a new investing era, and I'm giving it a term. I don't know if this will become the worldwide term for it. Maybe it will. I'm calling it the Age of Regenesis. The Age of Regenesis. Why am I calling it the Age of Regenesis? Because that's what we're doing. We're getting into an entirely new season, and I'm so excited to bring it to you. Like I say, I've been studying these cycles since 2011 when I first learned some of these ideas, and I've presented them many times over the years. If you've been around me very much, you've heard me present some of them before. If you're brand new and you've never met me before, well, this might be the first time, and that's fantastic. But what you need to know is this has been building for a long time, more than 10 years, and here we are. And I'm going to say it with a straight face, super confident. I'm excited to be here because I believe with every ounce of my body, we have reached a critical turning point in world history. And I put in parentheses here, it's a positive turning point. If you listen to enough of the people out there on the internet, they're telling you all sorts of doomsday stuff. They're telling you doom and gloom and bad things are happening and, this is happening and that's happening. And they really paint it out to be a worst case scenario. And it could not be further from the truth. How do I know? I'm going to tell you right now where I think we're going, and then we'll spend the rest of this presentation explaining it to you. Check out this chart right here. If you can see that chart, and hopefully you can see it, on the right side here, you see this orange line that goes straight up, basically. And I truly believe we are here. We are here right at the beginning of this curve. Now, if you look at the dates at the bottom, you see this goes way into the future. That's because we are at the beginning of an economic cycle that is just kicking off. In fact, we are in the very beginning. This is so exciting. Never in my lifetime, and unless you were born in, say, 1930, never in your lifetime have we ever had this opportunity before. This is the beginning of something new. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Jeremy Whaley. I'm founder of Trade Maestro, and I've been teaching people like you and really anybody how to trade the financial markets for the last 15 years. We focus on stocks and options and cryptocurrency and other financial assets. And this is something that I got into because I was studying market cycles. And in the process of that, I discovered various cycles that happen in all sorts of different aspects of our life. And back in 2011, when I first discovered some of these social cycles that I'm going to talk about, it blew my mind. And I realized that we were getting into what was really going to be kind of a dark era. And we've been going through that for the last 15 plus years. And here we are. We're finally to the other side of it. And if you've heard me present on this before, you know I've been predicting this. I've been saying that we're going to get to this day where we're setting up the next 80-year cycle. And I'm excited to share with you, I believe we're there. So let's jump in and let's start talking about it. I'm referring to this first part as the Trump era. Why is it the Trump era? Where it's the new Trump era. Of course, if you've been paying attention, there's a new president-elect. Depends on when you're watching this video. You may be watching it after he's already been sworn in. But from 2025 to 2029 is going to be Trump's second term. Now, I'm not making a political statement. I hope you really hear me. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm really not quite as political as you might think I am. I'm very libertarian in my politics. I'm very disconnected from the political parties. But in the social cycle, the cycles that we've been studying, the cycles that I've been looking at for the last 15 years, Trump marks an era. He marks the beginning of something, and it's specifically this term. I did not do this video in 2016 when he was first elected. It's this time, and you're going to see as I go through this presentation all the distinctions that lead to this moment. We have a 4 to 5 year window. This is one of the most important things I want to emphasize. We have about a 4 or 5 year window where we are at the beginning. This will never happen again in your lifetime unless we can live, 180 years. This is never going to happen again in your lifetime. It's never going to happen again in my lifetime. This is a once in a life opportunity. I'm not exaggerating it. This is a lifetime cycle. It's an 80 to 90 year cycle. and we are at the beginning of it, which means the seeds that we're going to plant, the business seeds that we're going to plant, the investing seeds that we're going to plant right now over the next 4 or 5 years are going to grow into the big fruits of the next 80-year cycle. So it's kind of like, I put here on the screen, it's kind of like if you could go back in time and start investing in the U.S. stock market just as a whole, the U.S. economy as a whole, between 1939 and 1944. That's the most similar parallel. Okay, so with that said, how do I know that this new Trump era is the era? I mean, after all, he's crazy, right? Well, here's how I know it. Number one, it's the rhetoric. The Trump rhetoric itself is reflective of the era that we're getting into. Number two, the characteristic of divisiveness. One of the things that people don't like about Donald Trump is they see him as very divided. And those people who do love Donald Trump, they look at the media and they say the media is super, super divided against Trump. Both people are actually right. Trump is divisive. He's polarizing, and the media is divisive against him. And this is actually the characteristic that we've been waiting for. We've been waiting to see this come to fruition. So while you might look at it from the outside and say, oh, this is terrible, if you look at it from the right lens, through the right lens, you're going to realize this is exactly what we've been waiting for. Now, let's talk about some of the Trump policies that he's been talking about leading into his second term. He talked about a new golden age. He's made a big deal about a new golden age. He's made a big deal about the United States being a leader in cryptocurrency. And he's made a big deal about tearing down government waste, so much so that they created an entirely new government agency that they called the government... I forgot what it is actually now. Department of Government Efficiency. That's it. DOGE. They've got Elon Musk heading it up. And if you look at the acronym for it, DOGE, it's the same acronym for Dogecoin, which is a cryptocurrency. So that's kind of maybe a little bit insightful in and of itself. So how do we do it? How do we participate in this new golden age, this new golden era that's coming? And here's my warning to you. You do not do it like you've been doing it for the last 50 years. If your idea of how to participate is to do it the same way we've been doing stuff for the last 50 years, that's exactly the wrong way. You say, well, what's the right way? The right way is to focus on investing in the future opportunities. And this is the term that I am giving regenesis. Regenesis. Now, why would I come up with this crazy term, regenesis? Well, it's not really that crazy of a term. Regenesis, if you've never heard the word before, actually has a specific meaning. It means new birth. It means renewal. And I've given this age of regenesis that term because that's what we're getting into. And like I said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is something that only happens every 80 years. And that means that it's the only time it's going to happen in my lifetime. It's the only time it's probably going to happen in your lifetime. You've never seen it before. I've never seen it before. We'll never see it again. But we're planting the seeds to regerminate, to rebirth society and the economy in ways that we've never seen before. And it's going to be super, super exciting. So let me show you the evidence to support this. First thing I want to share with you is this idea, kind of the theoretical idea that society is going through a cycle. Now, what kind of cycle am I talking about? Well, if you understand the seasons, you understand that we go through a spring and we go through a summer and we go through a fall and eventually we get to a winter, right? Well, if we think about this in terms of just your regular seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall, those are your environmental seasons. And in the springtime, we plant new seeds and we start seeing the brand new growth. And then we get to the summer and we have to work the fields and we work. Then we get to the fall and we harvest. Then we get to the winter. And what happens in the winter? In the winter, all the old stuff dies off. This is the idea of the seasons. In the spring, new birth comes forth. In the summer, it's really hard. It's laborsome. It's toilsome. We work. We harvest in the fall. And in the winter, old things die off. Now, what happens after everything dies off? Once everything dies off, we get into the next phase, which is the very beginning. It is the regenesis. This is when we're planting the seeds for the new spring. It is so exciting because that's where we are. That's where we are right now. We're getting into a societal spring. You're going to see we're getting into an economic spring. You're going to see we're getting into a spiritual spring. Everything that is coming just beyond the horizon is a spring. And what we're in right now is the regenesis of all of it. Now, this is not a new concept. This is not a new concept at all. This has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, King Solomon wrote about it when he said, there's nothing new under the sun. What's been has been, what has been will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. This is not a new concept. And yet, if you look at the media, They're saying it's never been like this. If you listen to the people that are freaking out on the internet, they say it's never been like this. This is terrible. You're right. In your lifetime, it's never been like this, but not in world history. In world history, not only has this happened before, but it has happened with remarkable consistency and predictable cycles. And I want to introduce you to a concept if you've never seen it before. It's a book that was written in the 1990s called The Fourth Turning by an author named William Strauss and Neil Howe. William Strauss and Neil Howe wrote this book. They called it American Prophecy. And when it came out in the early 90s, nobody really knew what to do with it. But I discovered it in 2011. 2011 is when I first discovered this and started learning about these societal cycles that are on the horizon. And I've been tracking with it. I've been paying attention to it. I've taught on it several times. And here we are. We are at the end of the fourth turning, the beginning of what they call the first turning, or the new societal spring. So I want to give you some of the high-level concepts here, and then I'll kind of go a little bit further and teach it to you. So the first principle of the fourth turning is that society moves through cycles, like seasons. I've already mentioned this. We've said that seasons are kind of like spring, summer, fall, and winter. In the spring, new birth is coming forth. In the summer, we work really hard. The autumn, we harvest. And in the winter, old things die away, right? Well, in society cycles, it's very much the same idea. Society goes through a spring, and this spring season generally lasts about 20 years. Then it goes through a summer, then it gets into a fall, and it gets into a winter. And sometimes they extend a little bit, sometimes they're a little bit shorter, but for the most part, this goes back about 20 years, and then we get into the next season. A complete cycle of 4 seasons is what Strauss and Howe referred to as a seculum. Okay, and then here's the really cool part. The seculums last about 80 years on average, but guess what? It keeps repeating and it goes over and over again. And in the book, they go back thousands of years, hundreds of years within the civilization that we know, and then they go back even further than that. And depending on different views of the cycle idea, the cycle theory, some people have tracked this back all the way to the beginning of time. And it's just amazing how consistently society goes through these cycles. So I want to share with you some of the highlights in terms of the key ideas and the key principles, so you can kind of see where we are. I've shared this before if you've been watching some of my videos, but if not, I'm going to just hit the 2 right columns. This is the third turning and the fourth turning. Before I get into it, I want to just help you understand. The first turning is what they refer to as the spring. The second turning is that summer season. And in the current seculum that we're in, the spring happened around 1946, 1945, 46, 47. The second turning, which is the summer season, started in the 60s. Okay, and then you got into that third turning, which happened in the mid-80s and really ran all the way through 2008. Now, if you do the math on that, you're like, wait a second, that was a little bit too long. Not too long, it was about 24 years in that third turning there. And then the fourth turning began in 2008 with the global financial crisis, and it's projected to go until about 2028, maybe 2029. It could end a little bit early, it could extend a year or two, but for the most part, we're right on track right now. I'm going to show you kind of some of the distinguishing factors here. So if you look at the third turning, you notice that this line families says in a third turning, the family structure is getting weak. And in the fourth turning, it actually starts to strengthen. And if you think about our current society, are families getting weaker or are they starting to strengthen? Well, I'm a baby boomer. And I remember when I was growing up, it was like every other parent that we were talking to was getting divorced. I was very fortunate. My parents never got divorced, but almost every one of my friends, I have very few friends whose parents did not get divorced, because in the 70s and 80s and 90s, that was the thing. That's what the baby boomers went through, right? So me, a Gen Xer, I was in there. I was a third turning baby. I grew up in that, and the family structure was weakening. Now here we are, and if you paid much attention to society, we actually have fewer marriages, but we have stronger families that are coming together. And so what you're seeing actually lower divorce rates, and the family structures that do get built are actually strengthening. That is a fourth turning characteristic. Now let's keep going here. I'm going to not read every one of these, but looking at child nurturing, in the third turning, it was tightening. If you go to the second turning, you notice child nurturing was actually really underprotective. That's what the baby boomers went through. Then you get through the third turning and it was starting to tighten. But if you know the parents of the fourth turning, and I am one of those, super, super protective. Fourth turning mamas are the most overprotective thing you've ever seen. The gap between gender roles is actually starting to widen again, interestingly enough. The ideals, this is an important one. Ideals in a third turning are actually being debated, where people are going back and forth about these ideals. ideals, and a fourth turning, they're being championed. And the MAGA movement itself is a perfect example of that, where you have certain ideals and they're really coming out and being championed really, really big, not even being debated. It's very dogmatic. If you look at society today, it's kind of very polarizing. This idea versus that idea, you pick a side. We're going one way or the other. If you look back at the third turning for the institutions are starting to erode away. But in a fourth turning, new institutions are being founded. The culture is very cynical in a third turning. And if in a fourth turning, it starts to become very practical. Again, think about the MAGA movement. You think about what Trump came in on, and it's very much focused on getting back to basics, just simplifying everything, thinning out the government, going small, getting very, very practical. The very idea of Department of Government Efficiency is a practical idea. And that's the reason that he was able to get so much support for it, because it's a very practical idea. Now, this next line is very important. Social structure. It was very diversified in the third turning. In the third turning, back in the 80s and 90s, what we saw with social structure is we actually saw these ideas coming up, and everybody's like, yeah, we got to support that. We got to support that. We got to support that. You get to today's culture, as we're in the fourth turning and moving back into the first turning, it's very gravitating. And a better word is polarizing, right? It's very much us and them, very separated. These ideas of social structure, no longer do they want them blended. People say, we've had enough. You're either going this way or you're going that way. And the majority is going to go one way or the other. That is a fourth turning characteristic. All the chaos you've been seeing on TV, these are fourth turning characteristics. It's all playing out before our eyes, okay? Worldview went from very complex to starting to simplify. And here's a really important one. The vision of the future went from darkening in the third turning to urgent in the fourth turning. Unlike any presidential cycle that I have ever lived through, this most recent presidential cycle was a presidential cycle of urgency. We have to do this. You saw stars coming out, people like Elon Musk, people like Joe Rogan coming out and saying, we have to elect this guy. If we don't, we may not have another election cycle. Now, you can say we've done that before, but it hasn't had the same kind of intensity that the 2024 election cycle had. And so you're seeing this urgency as the ideas and the ideologies are very polarizing. It's like a crisis moment. And that's a fourth turning energy. We haven't had it up until now. It's been building, but we haven't had it the way that we're experiencing it right now, okay? So that's just some of the ideas that you can see there, some of the different concepts. You can pause the video and read them in more detail if you want to, but I'm going to move on as I have a lot to talk about. So when we think about what's going on in society, people freak out about it. Oh, I've never seen it like this. No, you haven't seen it like this. But here's the good news, folks. We're just going through a cycle. That's it. We're going through a cycle. The good news is we are near the end. When I first started teaching about this in 2011, 2012, and then I did a really major teaching in 2020, right when coronavirus happened, when the COVID-19 thing happened, I did a major teaching then, and I shared it with a lot of people. And actually, a lot of the ideas that I'm sharing right now are ideas that I started pushing out in 2020, but it wasn't time yet. And here we are. The ideas have come to fruition. It is time. This is the time to start doing the investments, to start taking action on them. So I want you to know that this is not new. This is not like I'm just bringing this out of nowhere. It's just the time is suddenly here. And so that's what's exciting about it. We're going through a cycle. We are near the end. This is when the new institutions are being born. New institutions being born. I'll talk more about that momentarily. And what's so exciting is we are creating the next 80 years right now. That's what's so exciting about it. Right now, more than any time in history, we are creating the next 80 years. I say more than any time in history because that's an 80-year cycle. It hasn't happened since the Great Depression. Roughly the 1939 to 1944 window was the last time we went through a cycle like this, where we were literally reseeding everything. It was a regenesis. And that time we were coming out of the industrial age and we were going through World War II, and we came into this new age of the post-war era where all this stuff changed. And what changed? New institutions came in. The Federal Reserve really took over. It had been founded in 1913, but it really took over in the Great Depression, right? You looked at the global corporate idea of a business really took off in the 1940s, post-war. And all of that manufacturing and everything that became this huge, incredible cycle of economy in the United States, that all came out of the regenesis that happened in 1939 to 1944. You might have thought in your mind, oh, that was just a war period, because one of the characteristics of a fourth turning is a war. Okay, and I think we've been in a war. I think we've actually can make the argument that we've been in an information war for the last 10 years. And it's gotten really, really intense lately, right? And this has been a war that's been going on, and I think it's coming to an end. I really do. And so we've been in a war period. But just like in 1939 to 1944, we are in that season right now where we're going to start seeding all of this new stuff for the next cycle, the one that's going to look like 1946 and forward, okay? Super, super exciting. Napoleon Hill, the author of that great book, Think and Grow Rich, said every setback brings with it the seeds of the next opportunity. And that's where we are right now. So I just mentioned some of the institutions. One of the fourth turning characteristics is that old institutions start to die off. Old institutions start to die off. One of those institutions that I see dying off is what we have known in our lifetime as a traditional job and a traditional career. Okay, the idea of you wake up and you go to the office and you go work for a company for a long period of time and you get your pension and then you get to retire and ride off into the sunset. That institution, that idea is dying. That is a 20th century idea that is not going to be here as we get through this fourth turning and as we get into the next turning. And I'm going to show you some more evidence of that in just a moment. Higher education as we've known it. Higher education as we've known it in my lifetime is actually an old institution. Do you realize if you think back to the 20th century, higher education as we know it really took off post-World War II. It was a first turning idea that everybody needed to have this college degree and then eventually master's degrees and now doctorate degrees. And if you've looked at this cycle, the higher education market has just continued to grow year after year, decade after decade until recently. Until recently, what we're starting to see is actually in the last 3 years, the new freshmen coming into higher education has been dropping by about 5% per year. And that character trait actually goes back almost 15 years for the entire fourth turning that we've been going through. But it's really starting to accelerate now. Why is it accelerating? Because the old institution of higher education is in the beginning of dying off. 20 years from now, we will not have higher education the way that we've seen it. Not for the last 80 years. We'll still have it. It'll just look completely different. Okay. Another old institution dying off is the traditional financial planning model. Financial planning as you know it. Financial planning as you've experienced it since your entire lifetime. But from 1945 forward is a last 20th century idea. It comes from the last fourth turning. It really got established with Benjamin Graham's book, The Sophisticated Investor. And that's the idea that people like Warren Buffett and all these great investors over the last 20th century have heralded. Guess what? That model is gone. That model is an old 20th century idea, and there's an entirely new model that is on the horizon that's coming in. This is going to be where we're going for the next first turning as we're starting to plant the seeds right now. All right, another idea that is an old institution that's dying off, 20th century banking. The way that we do banking today, it did not happen until after the Great Depression. In fact, the reason the Great Depression was able to happen was because of all the bank runs, and it was all those bank runs and the bank failures that led to the banking system that we have today. Guess what? That's a 20th century institution, and that institution is on its way out. Another institution that's on its way out is this whole political idea of globalism. Globalism as we know it today, it's a 20th century idea. It's a post-World War II idea. It's the idea where the United States was this giant superpower that went around telling everybody else what to do, and we were all connected this way. I'm not saying we're not going to be connected in the future. I'm saying that globalism as we have known it is a dying institution. Corporate globalism, where you have this giant corporation that operates around the world, that is a dying institution. And as you're going to see momentarily, there's replacements that are already coming up, and many of them have already been proven. Let's look at a couple of them right now. All right, the first one I want you to understand is this whole idea of your traditional work job, your traditional career, is giving way to something that I termed 4 years ago, the at-homepreneur, the individual that's working at home. The whole idea of higher education is giving way to self-paced learning. No longer are we going to be going and getting a degree where we become a specialist, but instead, everybody's learning what they want to learn, and they can learn as much of it as they want to learn. Instead of the traditional financial planning model, we're looking at diversifying passive income. This is an idea that for the last 20 years has been capturing more and more people's attention, and we're there. This is going to be the way that people design their income moving forward. The destruction of fiat currency is what's coming. It is here. It is here right now. And the 20th century banking as we know it is gone. It's on its way out. And then there's this idea of globalism is actually moving back to an old antiquated idea of community where people are going to start thinking about community first. If we were to think about corporate globalism in this old 20th century model of corporate globalism, you were working at a business and the business was around the world. And let's say it was I don't want to name any specific ones, but it was a big global conglomerate. And, you just filled your role. And then as the business would get in trouble, what would they say? They'd say, well, we got to downsize. And so they would fire the individuals. Why? Because the corporation was king. The corporation had to survive. The corporation had to live because that was the most important institution. Not in the new era. Not in the new era. In the new era, it's going to be what I'm referring to as global communities. And we've already seen this taking off for the last 15 years in the form of social media. But what's happening is people are building these global communities where you connect to people all around the world. And these people come in, they become part of your tribe. They're your followers. And as they come in, you can start to know them. They start to know you. They like you. They trust you. They want to buy whatever it is that you have to offer. And so people are building entire enterprises just around these global communities. And it's amazing. I don't even have time to get down that rabbit hole right now. But the power of what you can do business-wise with a global community is unlike anything we have ever seen in world history. And we're there. We are there right now. It's one of the new institutions that's coming in. All right. So with that said, am I just making all this stuff up? Is this just this fourth turning idea? And Jeremy went down this rabbit hole and, he's just, drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak. No, I want to show you another idea. So the fourth turning is based on the idea of generational cycles and social cycles. But there's another cyclical idea. And this is an idea that in economics, I've been studying it for years. And the name of this is what we call conjunctive waves. And I don't think I said that right. I know I butchered it. Another shortened way is K waves. But K waves come to us from Russia, from a Russian economist by the name of Nikolai Kondratev. And Nikolai Kondratev, like I say, was a Russian economist. But in 1926, he started identifying these economic cycles going back hundreds of years. And what he did is he went through, he laid out all these different cycles and he showed how the cycles work. And he showed when empires were getting into big economic growth seasons and when they were getting out of big economic growth seasons. Well, Stalin came to him and he wanted to know what the future was for the United States. And Nikolai said, I know you don't want to hear it, but the United States is actually getting into the beginning of a big economic cycle. And he was right. The United States was getting into the beginning of a regenesis. And I'm going to show you the chart here in just a minute. But what Nikolai Kondratev correctly surmised is that the United States was going through a period where the old was dying off and we were going to be getting into a big grand cycle, if you will, moving forward. Well, Stalin hated his forecast so much that he put him in jail, and eventually in the early 1930s, I think it was 1931 or 32, they executed Nikolai Kondratev, and his work was almost completely lost. But in the 60s and 70s and really 80s and 90s, it came back to light. And some people really dug into it and have brought it to us. So let me show you a couple things here. There's a great chart that shows the waves of innovation as reflected through the Kondratev waves. And you can see going all the way back to really the beginning of the United States, 1780. This is how far they went back and identified the first wave of the Industrial Revolution. And then you got into the second wave that started 1830, kind of moved through 1880. The third wave was 1880 through the 1930s. And this is where, if you're kind of following the history here, this is where the K waves were starting to be discovered. And Kondratev says to Stalin's got him executed, but he says, yeah, the United States, they're going into a big technical revolution here. And they got him killed. Anyway, he was right. 1930 through 1970. And then if you look on the far right side, we're starting a sixth wave. We actually began it in 2010. If you can see that there, we started this in 2010. And if you go back, what did I say earlier? The fourth turning began 2008 with the financial crisis. The global financial crisis marked the beginning of the fourth turning. What came right after that? Well, unless you've been under a rock, you know Bitcoin was a response to the global financial crisis. And this actually is a fourth turning institution. It is laying the foundation for the next wave of our future, our economic future, where we're going, banking and everything else. And we're going to talk about some of that momentarily as well. But coming back to the chart here from 2010 moving forward to about 2050 is where this wave of the K waves will cycle through. Now I'm going to show you another variation of this, and this is laid out a little bit more horizontal, kind of like a sine wave. And you can just kind of look at some of the history moving back. But look on the right side here, you'll notice that it's marked on this chart as a phase shift and an overlap as these new technologies are coming in. And you can see the 2010 where these two crossed over here, that began this, or actually just before 2010, that began this new cycle of where this new technology is coming in. So we're really, really early in the K wave, and we've got this new technology that was scary 5 or 10 years ago, but today it's becoming not scary, it's becoming the future. This is the Regenesis. This is the beginning of all of it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, a couple cycles, surely that doesn't prove everything. Guess what? I did some research on this. Several other cycles. We've already talked about demographic cycles and social cycles. Elliott wave cycles. This is a cycle we've looked at in the stock market for years. I'm very familiar with it. It lines up with this theory. There's a spiritual cycle that the Hindus have looked at for thousands of years. And guess what? Depending on who you're listening to and whose analysis of the Hindu cycles you look at, we are right at the beginning of a new spiritual regenesis as well. Carl Jung, he had psychological cycles that he identified that match up with where we are. And the one that blew my mind, because I don't study these a lot, but astrological cycles. Like I say, I don't look at astrological cycles very much. In the world of the stock market, believe it or not, there is an entire analysis called astro trading or astrological trading where people look at astrological cycles, but it's not something that I've spent much time with. But when I was doing some research on this concept, I just started looking at different cycles, and I went to ChatGPT and I said, hey, what are some astrological cycles that line up with the fourth turning? Would you believe it that there's 6 astrological cycles happening right now that all point to the exact same future as the fourth turning? And maybe the most interesting one is Pluto and the return of the cycle of Pluto coming back towards the Earth. This is a 248-year cycle. This is crazy what I'm going to tell you. It's a 248-year cycle. When Pluto's return comes in astrological terms, it represents new birth. It represents regenesis. And guess when the last time this happened was? The American Revolution, which is the first fourth turning revolution documented in American history. Before that, you have to go all the way over to Europe, and that's where Strauss and Howe go all the way back, and they track their history. But in the United States, the American Revolution was the beginning. It was the regenesis, the start of something new. And that was the last time that Pluto began its cycle, moving back to planet Earth. When do you think that's starting again? Literally, from when I'm recording this video, it's tomorrow. I couldn't believe when I was doing that research. I was like, oh my goodness, this is tomorrow. November 19th. I'm recording this on the 18th. It starts tomorrow, is the beginning of Pluto's return. Then there was 5 other astrological cycles that AI generated for me that it was just incredibly eye-opening. So when you think about cycles and you think about, is Jeremy crazy? No. I am anything but crazy. The evidence is overwhelming. 2024 to 2028, 2029, roughly in that range, is the window to plant the seeds for the next 80 to 100 years. We are there, folks. We've been waiting for this. I've been so excited about this. I've been preaching about it for years, saying that this time was coming, and we are here. I'm so excited about it. I'm going to share some charts with you, and this will kind of lay some future vision for you of what we could possibly anticipate, okay? So take a look at this chart here. This is going back to 1860 to the 1935 fourth turning, and what you see is following the Civil War around 1865, we started the new regenesis. That was the fourth turning regenesis. As we're getting into the spring, that led to the Gilded Era, which is one of the greatest growths in American history. And that came all the way through what we've referred to as the Roaring 20s. But if you look at the chart, you look at the green line, it started to decline 1920 moving into the 1930s. Why? because that wasn't a fourth turning anymore. If you look at the decline of the chart, that was the fall, or the third turning, when everything was starting to fall apart, and it got into the fourth turning where the old system started to break down, the old institutions started to die off. That decline is what you normally see in a third turning moving into a fourth turning. Now take a look at this next chart that I'm going to put up on the screen. And this is from 1920, so I kind of overlapped it here. 1920 and 30 looks pretty flat. But the next fourth turning Regenesis was right there, right before 1940. And then we got into the post-war era, and you can see where the U.S. economy went from there. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking, well, wait, there's no decline. It says decline phase, but the line just goes straight up. I know. Why in the world would the line just go straight up? I'm going to explain it to you, because in the 20th century, they did something in banking that was not consistent with the previous turning. In the previous turning, we were on a gold standard. In the previous turning, gold was fixed at roughly $20 an ounce. And in the middle of the Great Depression, Roosevelt, he undid that. He took us off the gold standard briefly and then reissued gold at $35 an ounce, where it stayed until early 1970s when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard completely. Now, you may not understand the significance of that, but I'm going to show you on a chart. Here's what happened over the last 35 years. The blue line, I've zoomed in now, this is from 1990 to 2025. The blue line is the GDP, the U.S. economy basically continuing to grow through those 35 years. The orange line is the buying power of your U.S. dollar. And so what's happened, they've played with our money. They turned it into what we often refer to as funny money. Because they devalued our currency, because of inflation, it looks like the GDP went up. But in terms of real buying power, it did not. In terms of real buying power, we've been struggling through a third and a fourth turning economy. Really, it's been a depression. That's the truth. If you feel like it's been really hard economically, it's because technically we've been in a depression. But like the Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke said all those years ago, he said we couldn't have another depression because we would print our way out of it. He said we have this magic tool called the printing press. And that's what they did. And that's what this chart shows. So what they were able to convince you of, if you believed them, is that GDP was going up. The economy was growing. But in reality, the buying power of the dollar was collapsing, and it has collapsed. So I want to say this before I go any further. You've probably, if you've been in America paying attention to anything on the internet for the last 10 years, certainly the last 5 years, you've been hearing people say that the dollar was going to collapse. Guess what, folks? It's been collapsing for 30 years. This is not new. It's not just recently. This has been going on now for the majority of my life, for the majority of your life, depending on how old you are. Okay, this is exactly what they've been doing with our currency. And so what they've done is they've skewed the charts to show that the GDP and the economy is actually getting better, when in reality, it hasn't been. That's why people feel so tight. That's why people feel like everything has gotten overly tightened, okay? So let me put all this onto a chart now, and I'll share this with you. This is the two cycles together. You can see the revolutionary turning going from 1860. I said revolutionary, I meant Civil War. The turning that happened around the Civil War from 1860 to the 1920s. You can see that. And it just looks like a flat line, but you saw it. You saw it just a couple charts ago when it looked like this. Remember that? That was actually amazing growth, right? But then we come over here and you say, well, that looks flat. That's how big the 20th century economic growth was. And if we just take the same curve, if we just take the same growth that we can expect, and what I did is I had AI calculate, and I literally had ChatGPT go back and I said, okay, based on these two cycles, what would the next turning's economic growth look like? This is what it generated for us, okay? It's this orange line. You say, well, where's the gap that's happening here? That's the decline where the dollar was collapsing and GDP says that it's going up, but it wasn't going up. This is actually like missing data. That's why it's missing here, okay? So we are here. We are at the fourth turning Regenesis. That's why I'm so excited. This is what I have waited for the last 15 years. And I say it with great confidence. It has nothing to do in and of itself with Donald Trump. It's just that he's the marker. He is the one that showed up at the right time. Would another candidate have experienced the same thing? Maybe. I can't say positively or negatively. I think actually the two presidential candidates that we just had perfectly reflect everything I know about a fourth turning presidential election. Very polarizing, extreme ideologies. And the interesting conversation or the connection that all these turnings have in common, going back through all of history, is that somehow society always chooses the right one. And so I'm going with that. I'm going to go with it and say, whether you were a fan of Trump or if you weren't a fan of him, I'm going to say that society chose him and he's in charge. And this is where we are in the society cycles. And I truly believe this is where we're going. I think we're at the beginning, the regenesis of the next 80-year cycle. And it's up to us to go out there and seed it. So this is why I'm so excited. Let's talk a little bit about some opportunities, and then I'll tell you how you can learn more and where we're going from here. So let's look at a couple of opportunities. And the opportunities that we've got right now, there's more life-changing, money-making opportunities than you could do in your entire lifetime. If you've been around, you've heard me say there's more money-making opportunities every day than you could do in your entire lifetime. I just changed that. There's more life-changing money-making opportunities every day than you could do in your entire lifetime. Let's look at some of those ideas. I already shared some of these with you. I said the rise of the at-homepreneur, self-paced learning, diversified passive income, destruction of fiat currency, community first. I want to go a little bit deeper in some of these ideas. Let's look at the idea of the at-homepreneur. Whether you realize it or not, there is a new economy that's been brewing, and it's been referred to as the gig economy. Now, if you're like me in 2020, when COVID happened and they sent everybody home, you notice that all the fast food restaurants and all the stores, they were fully staffed, right? And then when they reopened the stores, they couldn't find enough staff. And we're still seeing, in my area, we're still seeing signs that say, we can't be open because we don't have enough staff. We're still seeing grocery stores that used to be 24 hours have gone down to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and they don't have enough staff to go overnight hours. And in fact, I don't think there's any 24-hour stores outside of like a gas station in my area anymore. They've all closed down because they don't have enough staff. And it seems like every store we go into, they don't have enough staff. And so I asked the question for 2 or 3 years. I was like, where did all these people go? And here's what happened. COVID pushed them home. And when COVID pushed them home, it forced them to think differently. Instead of thinking about having a low-paying hourly job where they were maybe in retail or they were in fast food or something, instead of that, they actually went online and they became part of this new economy that we call the gig economy. Here's an interesting statistic. This is, as of 2024, according to Gallup, 36% of Americans, that's 1 in every 3 Americans you meet on the street, 36% are participating in the gig economy, meaning they do not have a single job. They have multiple gigs. They basically work at home. They go from job to job, or they have multiple clients. We've heard about fractional CEOs and fractional CFOs, C-level positions that are now doing it at home in the gig economy. It's incredible. And here's what we're seeing in the cycle. Over the next 20 years, most likely the size of this cross-section will go from 36% to somewhere between 90 and 95%. In the next 20 years, 90 to 95% of Americans will not have a traditional job. They will work as part of the gig economy. Now that's incredible. I mean, talk about an old institution dying off and a new institution coming. The gig economy is changing everything. Here's another idea. We talked about higher education. Okay, well, what about self-paced learning? Between 2011 and 2021, 14.6% of incoming freshmen declined. I hope that made sense the way I said that. Basically, freshmen that were graduating from high school and coming into college, it was a decline of a total of 14.6% over those 10 years. That averaged out to about 1.6% per year. Okay. They thought it had stabilized, and then recent studies show it's actually gotten worse. As of 2024, incoming freshmen are declining at a rate of 5% a year. And this has been pretty consistent for the last 3 years. It's actually been accelerating. You say, well, where are they going? Are they not learning anything? Yeah, they are. They're doing e-learning and online courses. The stuff that I've been doing for 15 years, where I've been teaching people to trade and do online business and stuff. This industry now, it was kind of small when I started 15 years ago, but this industry now is a $500 billion a year industry. And according to Forbes, they're expecting this to double to by 2030. So it'll be a $1 trillion industry. Okay, online courses. So you've seen them all over the internet. I mean, it's nobody's hiding, from Teachable to Thinkific to the stuff that I put on my website to all these different companies that are out there and individuals that are offering courses on different things, different how-to things. You know, you got the discount courses like udemy.com, and you've got more premium courses. You got all these different courses that are out there. That has created a $500 billion industry. Now, to put that in perspective, if that doubles, even if it doesn't double, it's a huge industry. But as that doubles by 2030, here's what you need to know. By 2030, it will be a similar size to higher education. In fact, they're expecting it could be that it outpaces higher education because higher education is starting to get smaller. So by 2030, 5 years basically, 5-6 years from now, by 2030, online courses will be the new education. Incredible. Old institutions dying off, new institutions coming in. Let's take a look at another one. What about the destruction of fiat currency? People say there's no way, Jeremy, this is never going to happen. Oh, it's happening. Take a look at this. Do you realize there's a bill working its way through Congress right now, HR 2435, the new Gold Standard Restoration Act? And it's got traction. And under the Trump administration, they're saying they're going to pass it. There's another one that's been working its way through. It's a Senate bill, 4912. It's the Bitcoin Act of 2024. If you've not paid attention to this, let me tell you some of the highlights. In this bill, they are proposing, and Trump and his administration that's coming in have said they're going to support it. They're proposing to acquire 200,000 Bitcoin per year for the U.S. Treasury for 5 years in a row, ending with a 1 million Bitcoin supply in the U.S. Treasury. Now, that tells us a lot of stuff. Number one, it tells us Bitcoin's not going anywhere. It also tells us that the U.S. government thinks Bitcoin's important. It just puts the big old stamp of approval on Bitcoin. It tells us that the U.S. government is expecting it to hold its value. Do you realize that the Ecuadorian government has already moved most of their national reserves over to Bitcoin? There's other countries that are moving their national reserves over to Bitcoin. And with a 1 million Bitcoin holding, the U.S. government will control 5% of the total Bitcoin supply. Now, that is an incredible stamp of approval and endorsement, but more importantly, it tells us a foreshadowing of how much Bitcoin could be worth in the future because you're going to have so much demand for it. The U.S. government itself is going to take up 5% of the supply. It's incredible. Now, when this was announced at the Bitcoin conference back in the summer of 2024, Trump was there speaking, and they promised, and they have held true to that so far, that crypto deregulation and clarity will be coming. And since the election, it seems to be the norm. It seems to be this is exactly where we're going, okay? So where do we start? If you're looking at all these opportunities and you say, I want to get started, where do I start? Well, let's start with the stock market. We're at the beginning of the next stock boom. We really are. Stocks are not going anywhere. This is basically like 1939. If you go back to the last 2 fourth turnings, you go back to following the Civil War, stock market didn't go anywhere. It got bigger and bigger and bigger, right? You go back to after the World War II period, stock market didn't go anywhere. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. People say, well, if we go to a gold standard, the stock market has to crash, right? As it devalues and everything and deflates is the word I was looking for. No, it does not have to crash. In fact, it didn't crash in the last one. Whenever you're on a gold standard, the market does not have to crash. In fact, it just keeps getting stronger. What was unnatural was the inflation that we were having in the fiat currency, but by flipping over to a gold standard currency or maybe some sort of a hybrid, I'm not sure how they could do it, but if we were to go to some sort of a variation there, what you would see less of the erratic behavior and more consistent behavior, but you're not going to see a crash. The stock market is here and it's going to continue getting stronger. All right. So again, this is like 1939. The next 80-year cycle is beginning. And so my recommendation, obviously I'm a little biased because this is what I do, but I say this is the time more than any other time. You got to learn to take advantage of the stock market. This is the time right now, okay? So I'm just going to plug that one really fast. If you've not learned how to trade stocks yet, come let me help you. Okay, go over to my website at trademaestro.com. Here, I'll put it up here right here. If you've not been to trademaestro.com, get over there and get signed up for something free. And let me help you learn how to pick a trend and trade. We've got some great models that are really easy to follow, and you can do this. You do not need to go through a traditional financial planner. You don't have to have millions of dollars to do it. You can get started right now, okay? So there's my big plug for that. Now let's talk about crypto, because this is the next one. This is really, crypto and blockchain is the financial future. This is the fastest growing technology in the history of the world. Maybe soon to be eclipsed by AI, but currently it's the fastest growing in the history of the world. Since the election, do you realize this? Depending on when you're watching this video, do you realize that cryptocurrency as a whole is up 30 to 40% since the election? Bitcoin is up a little bit more than 30%. There's other cryptos like XRP and XLM that have doubled, 100% gain since the election. Now, I'm recording this video 2 weeks after the election. So 100% gain. Just let that sink in. That's like buying a house for $500,000 and 2 weeks later selling it for $1 million. That's 100% gain. Okay. And we've had multiple cryptocurrencies in the last 2 weeks that have doubled in price, doubled in value. Bitcoin, which is the most expensive and the most widely traded, has gone up over 30% in the last 2 weeks. And I just gave you some statistics about what the government's going to do with Bitcoin. This is just getting started, folks. We are not at the beginning, but we are getting into a really powerful wave of growth for blockchain and for crypto. Decentralized finance is the term. If you're not familiar with it, decentralized finance is going to be replacing the central banking system, and this leads to endless opportunities. Now, again, if you're not familiar with the idea of decentralized finance, basically what it's doing is it's taking this old idea where everything goes through a banking system, everything goes through the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and it's decentralizing it. It gives incredible autonomy to the individual. It actually creates better transparency and a whole lot better security. And most importantly, it gets rid of the people who are doing nefarious things because it takes out the middleman. Decentralized finance. Since 2009, 2010, when Bitcoin came on the scene, that was what it was created for. It was as a decentralized protocol. And we've just seen blockchain technology taking off for the last 15 years, and we're there. I mean, we are there. This thing is about to go mainstream. If you thought the last couple cycles were big, you ain't seen nothing yet. To put it in perspective of where we are with cryptocurrency and blockchain, we are in that cycle about where we were in 2003 with the technology cycle. So if you can imagine going back to 2003 and buying Apple or buying Microsoft maybe, or, you know, a lot of the technology companies that you've traded since then weren't even in existence then. But imagine buying Google in 2003, right? That's kind of where we are. And in the same way, there's a lot of the cryptos that are going to be great cryptos that we haven't even seen yet because they haven't been created. They haven't come on the market yet. And so we are right at the beginning of that wave in the Elliott wave cycles. I think it's probably a third wave. If anybody knows what that is, we can debate that, but it's going to be a big one. And there's a huge future for where cryptocurrency is going and blockchain technology as a whole. All right, another place to put your attention is AI, artificial intelligence. Folks, we're just getting started. This is, in terms of the cycle of growth, AI is basically where we were with the internet around 1995. So if you lived through the internet revolution, which I did, I was just getting to college then. And when I was in high school, we didn't have internet. By the time I was a freshman in college, we had it. It was like over a summer, we went from not knowing what this thing was to we had internet. And then suddenly AOL, America Online, was in every home. And it was a 2 or 3 year window where the internet just swept the country like a wave. And I lived through that. And many of you did too. That's where we are with AI. Okay. We experienced that cycle. If you want to know where we are AI wise, we are where we were with blockchain in 2020. Cryptocurrency in 2020 just took off. Just out of nowhere, it took off, and we were at that same cycle. And for about a 2 or 3 year window, about a 2 year window, we just accelerated. It pulled back bigly, and now we're getting into the next wave of crypto. AI is in that cycle. Okay, so just putting those two cycles together, I know I should probably have a chart for this, but I don't. AI is in the cycle that would line up with cryptocurrency in 2020, 2019, moving into 2020. And it's in the spot where technology sector would have been in 2003. That just gives you an idea of where we are in terms of cycles. So it's like buying Bitcoin in 2017, moving into that next cycle. You're just really early there. Okay. It's just so much AI opportunity. By 2040, pretty much all routine jobs will be executed via AI. Less than 20 years. You're looking at 15 years down the road, 10 to 15 years. All routine jobs will be executed with AI. Think about this like buying into Ford. And, it was still during the buggy days. Sure, there were other automobiles, but Ford made it mainstream. That's where we are with AI. It's an incredible opportunity. And let me hit the last one here. The idea of a personalized business, building your business around you, around your own person, building a global community, building a community of like-minded people, and then turning around and monetizing that opportunity. This is where business is going. I promise 15, 20 years from now, the majority of businesses will not be Inc. 500 global corporations. That was a 20th century idea. 15, 20 years from now, the Inc. 500, if they even do the list, will be individuals like you and me running empires from our bonus rooms, in our house, with our internet, with our laptop computers, with our live streaming devices, talking to people around the world. You can be a global business sensation in 50, 80, 100 countries around the world that fast today. It used to take 10, 15 years to build up to that. In the 1990s, they used to talk about a 5-year business plan. Today, it's not even worth it. Today, whenever I sit down and do a business plan, I have a 10-year vision. It's on one piece of paper. This is where I want to be in 10 years. And then I go down to a 3-year vision. This is where I want to be in 3 years. And then I work down to a 1 year. Where do I want to be in a year? And that's my plan. I start with a 1 year, and then I go down to a 6-month and a 90-day and a 30-day plan. A 5-year plan it's obsolete today. 30 years ago, in the last 20th century, in the third and fourth turning of the last century, a 5-year business plan made sense. Today, it doesn't. Not in the same way that it did back then. Today, we have to be so agile. We have to be so reactive in what we're doing. It's the new era. It's where we are. And technology is changing that fast. Opportunities are changing that fast. Folks, if you're even kind of interested, if you even have like the smallest entrepreneurial bone in your body, this is the time to get into business with yourself and for yourself. This is the time to take advantage of the new horizon. All right. So folks, I can't believe it. Here we are. I have the opportunity to say it to you. Welcome to the new Age of Regenesis. Welcome to the Age of Regenesis. We have waited for 15 years for this. The next 4 or 5 years are going to be life-changing. We're going to be planting more seeds than we've ever planted before. We're doing more investments we've ever done before. And over the next 15, 20 years, those are going to start to sprout and produce fruit like we have never, ever seen. We're at the beginning of an 80-year cycle. So welcome. Welcome to this cycle. I'm so excited to record this video for you. Listen, if you're not on my mailing list, then get over to Trade Maestro and get on my mailing list. If you're watching this on YouTube or somewhere else, then subscribe. If you're on Facebook, like, follow, whatever you need to do. If you're on another one of the social outlets, do whatever you need to do so I can send you some more updates, because I've got 6 of these videos in this kind of series on Regenesis that I'm putting together that I want to share with you. And so I know you're going to want to see the rest of them, because I just gave you a big picture overview here. I'm going to do another video on what's coming with crypto. I'm going to do another video on what's coming with business and what's coming with stock market and just all these opportunities that are coming, because this is it. I mean, we're never going to have another opportunity to do it. So make sure you've liked and subscribed. Make sure you followed. Sign up over at trademaestro.com. And until next time, I wish you the best. Normally I would say happy trading, but this time I was going to say welcome to the new age, the Age of Regenesis. Let's go get the planting. Let's do it.